to our YouTube class, the class that shall not be named. I'm sorry we didn't have class last week. At the last moment, my family, everybody got sick, including me, but we're all much better now. Looking forward to teaching today.
Was it a COVID?
It was not COVID, it was a stomach bug. My son ended up having it, still has it. He had it for like 10 days. It was off and on. Finally went to a doctor. My wife and my son, my daughter and myself, we had it like for a day. I had it for less like one evening, and that was it. But I didn't know at the time if I was gonna be sick. And my wife got it really bad for one day. So she had to go to get the 2 bags of fluid, but she's doing good now. So what we're going to talk about today is we have only 3 people here, but representing 3 different states. So that's pretty impressive. And everybody else can go online. I think maybe people don't realize we have class. We'll see. Maybe they just didn't want to show. But what we had talked about is talking about the early formations of Christianity and the separation from Judaism. So that would, of course, lead us to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. So we're going to probably take 2 sessions on this. We'll see. It's a really interesting topic. The difference between talking about this stuff and, of course, talking about the time of Moses and the kings of ancient Israel is a significant period of time has passed. And because this time has passed, welcome to Paul. Welcome to Eva. We're just starting, guys. Because 1,000+ years have passed, we have extra sources. So if you're talking about the biblical age, you're talking about the Bible, the Torah, and very little else. You have obviously some archaeological evidence, which does not prove conclusive in most cases. A few pieces of writing on walls here and there, some tablets, but very little evidence. Once you get to 1,000, 100, 200, we start to have extra resources, which really can help us figure out what was going on. In some cases, very thoroughly. In other cases, not at all. But certainly we have these extra resources, and even if you don't consider them holy, they're still historical books. For instance, the book of Maccabees is a great example. It's not considered holy in the Jewish world. It's not in our Bible, but it is certainly an essential piece of history that really teaches us a lot about this time in our history. So what we're going to specifically talk about today is Christianity, Judaism, the separation, what exactly happened. And obviously that begins in the 1st century CE. So again,
Rabbi, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure, please.
You had mentioned the other books in the Bible. I know there was a great deal of dispute in the Christian Bible, what books got included. Who determined what got included in ours?
That is again a great question. The farther along in history you go, the more evidence you have. By the time they choose the books for the New Testament and that they've been, scholarship has been around, so we have a lot more evidence. We don't know, and there's no definitive proof as to when the Bible was codified. The prevailing theory is that it happened after the destruction of the temple, around the year 90. So that is where the group of Pharisees who had survived came and started a house of study or an area of study at Yavneh. And so 90 is a date kind of given for various reasons, so that would be it. And it's the famous story of Yochanan ben Zakkai. I don't know if you know the story. The rebellion was in full gear. The temple was being seized and sieged. And Vespasian, who was the general in charge of the taking of this area, was about to destroy it. Anyway, the disciples of a man named Yochanan ben Zakkai and Yochanan ben Zakkai were in the city. Now, not everybody in the city of Jerusalem wanted to revolt against the Romans, but the zealots and the people who were revolting had closed off the city, so nobody could get out. And so Yochanan ben Zakkai faked his death. They go out to bury him. They're carrying, because they let Jews out to go bury him. That was kind of a decision by both sides. They go out to bury him. He gets out of the casket. He goes to Vespasian. This obviously is not probably a true story, but it's a myth. But it is true that Ben Zakkai did survive. And the next part is true about what happens to Vespasian. He goes to Vespasian and says, listen, I'm not a rebel. I'm supportive of the Roman Empire. Many of us aren't. All I want to do is take my people and have a place to create our own study area, and we'll be completely supportive to you. Will you do this for us? And Vespasian says, why am I going to do this for you? He says, because you know what? I'm going to tell you right now that you are going to be the emperor of Rome. And as soon as he says that, a messenger comes in and says, the emperor's died, Vespasian, you need to go back to Rome because you are going to become emperor. And so Vespasian gives Yavne to Ben Zakkai, and thus we have Rabbinic Judaism. Is that story true? Pieces are certainly true. Vespasian does become the emperor of Rome while he is sieging the city. He does not finish the siege. His son Titus does, who then will, of course, be a later emperor. And, of course, if you've been to Rome, they have the famous Arch of Titus, where it shows the depiction of the Jews being carried off out of Jerusalem along with the menorah. So 90 is about the age many people believe that the book was codified as it is today. So, and that's exactly, that's one of the most important parts of what we're going to talk about. The destruction of the temple really leads to almost everything. A lot of it is actually pretty good. So what's going on in this period in history? So you have to understand, during this period, Judaism was a religion, but it was not what you would call a religion of one group. There were multiple groups within the Jewish world. And unlike today where we all get along and always agree, back then they didn't. So who were these different groups? The two most famous were, of course, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So these were the two most famous, probably the two most powerful. In basic terms, the Sadducees were in many respects the elite and the priests. Now, we have to remember people in both the Pharisees and Sadducees were good people, and there were people who were not so good. Obviously, in writings, the entire parties or the entire sect is labeled, but how can you label an entire sect? I mean, you can't say every human being who was a Pharisee was a good person or a bad person. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees were the main sects. The Sadducees connected to the temple. They believed in the Torah. They believed in sacrifice. They believed in the sanctity of the temple, which sounds pretty obvious considering the fact that they were the priests who controlled the temple. They were supportive of the Roman Empire, as they'd been supportive of previous empires. They were the descendants of the Maccabees in some cases, who had, but in some cases they weren't. So the Pharisees were what we call the proto-rabbis. They believed in the resurrection after the apocalypse. They believed in study. They believed in the entire Bible and extra writings. These were the ones that were writing things that would eventually be in the Mishnah and the Talmud. And they too were not anti-Roman, except some of their beliefs the Romans may have considered as anti-Roman. They were not anti-Roman. In the New Testament, you'll see that the Pharisees are kind of labeled, and sometimes all Jews are Pharisees. Sometimes they're labeled as bad, but really the Pharisees were just one of the sects. Another sect, of course, were the Essenes or the Essenes. I don't know if any of you have heard of them. They have become very famous because obviously they left a library behind that would become the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's probably the main reason we know about them and speak of them. They were a more ethereal group that were more about philosophy, more about separating so we are not, the evil of other human beings don't infiltrate us. They were pious. They celebrated the Sabbath. They wanted to go out into the desert, one group, and just kind of do their own thing. They were almost hermits in some way, or almost not hermits, that would be individuals. They were almost, what's the word in Christianity? Monks, almost monk-like. And they probably would have died off on their own because mostly older guys joined this group, and obviously without women, you don't have children. So they believed in the sanctity of the temple, though. They just believed that, in many respects, the temple was so essential that people shouldn't be going there every day sacrificing, that they were kind of like doing something wrong in this way. So those were three groups. You also have the fourth group, which of course are the zealots, the insurrectionists, those who wanted to take down the Roman Empire. Not the brightest people, obviously, to take down the Roman Empire. They are the ones that are going to start the war and rebel, and of course the temple is going to be destroyed because of them. But this is another group. So they were kind of, this group that was very radical. The Essenes were more apocalyptic than the Pharisees. The Pharisees were thinking we'd have resurrection at the end, but the Essenes were probably thinking the apocalypse is coming fairly soon. Now, what we also have to remember is most people were probably not any of these four. Most people were like regular farmer Jews, living just like their families had always lived. Your Judaism was according to your family or your group. We didn't have tribes anymore. You probably made pilgrimage once in a while, but you were not a Pharisee or a Sadducee. You might be supported. And also, just because you were a Pharisee didn't mean you didn't like the Sadducees. Just because you were a Sadducee didn't mean you liked the Pharisees. Just because you were a Cohen didn't mean you weren't a Pharisee. There was a lot of crossover. So, and again, it was probably a very small percentage that were these four groups. Most Jews were just regular Jews. They may have thought more highly of one group or the other, but they were just regular Jews. And so this is the world we're living in. Now, were there other groups? There were probably other groups as well. And so it wasn't just these groups. These just are the four. Like if you go to a class and they talk about the groups of Judaism, these are the four they're going to talk about. The Zealots, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes or Essenes, depending on how you pronounce them. No matter how I pronounce it, just know that's the right way to pronounce it. So these are groups of Jews that are just living their lives. And there are smaller groups. So what are some of the other smaller ones that we know a little bit? There's the Herodians, those who were supporters of Herod the Great. Herod was the official Roman governor of Israel to his death in 4 BC. He was a cruel dictator. He was given this spot by Augustus, who wanted somebody in the land to ensure that things went smoothly and didn't rebel. So he was an Idumean. He was a part of a group that was forcibly converted by Jews. So the Jewish elite forcibly converted the Idumeans in the 1st century BCE or late 2nd century BCE. One of the rare times Jews have ever forcibly converted anybody. He is a descendant of them. So he was raised with Jews saying, you're not really Jewish, you're Idumean, you're an Idumean, which was really problematic because he was also ruthless. And when he did, he was smart enough to get in good with Augustus, as opposed to who was Augustus vying for power with? The one who was friends with Julius Caesar, had the affair with Cleopatra. What's his name? Went to war against the big brute, strong guy from Rome. Anyway, he didn't.
Brutus.
Not Brutus, the one who killed him.
Mark Antony.
Mark Antony, thank you. So, whereas a lot of the Jews were siding with Mark Antony, who seemed like he might be the person who's going to take over, Herod sided with Augustus, of course, who we now look at. Octavian was Octavian at the time, became who's one of the most brilliant men of all time. And so Herod was ruthless, killing Jews left and right. He is famous, though, for his buildings. Killed his own children when he thought they might want to usurp him. And so there were still vestiges of him around during this period. So there were also the Samaritans, which is a group of Jews that separated from the main group in the 8th century, 1,000 years earlier, and continue to be around to this day. There's still Samaritans in Israel. They set up their own temple on Mount Gerizim and had their own Hebrew, and they still exist. They had a descendant of their priest. They had a descendant of their head priest from the 8th century all the way to about the 16th century. So they had a descendant of their priests alive for about 2,400 years. The same line, at least that's what they said, until I don't know whichever one didn't have kids eventually. So these are different groups. There's lots of different groups. They're all hanging out, doing their thing. Most are just probably not part of any of them. And then it is in a time where the messianic view is very popular. Has anybody seen The Life of Brian by Monty Python? Wow, am I the only one who's seen The Life of Brian? Watch The Life of Brian. Not as famous, of course, as The Meaning of Life or what was the other one, the best one? The Crusades one. But it, they're walking down a road and they have a Messiah at each stop. There's a beggar. He's actually a Messiah. There's just one Messiah after another, because this is an age where Messiah or the apocalypse was becoming very popular, especially as Rome became harsher and harsher. So it's during this messianic apocalyptic viewpoint time that all these things are going on. Rome's becoming oppressive. You've got the Zealots. You've got the Sadducees. You've got the Pharisees. You've got all these issues going on at this one time. You've got, should we follow the Torah? Should we follow these other books? Should we go to the temple? Should we go to the synagogue? Should we believe in the resurrection of the dead? Should we go live in the desert and just become, monks? Should we revolt? All of these things are going on in one place. So you can see how it's a very interesting time to live. If there hadn't been a war against Rome and the destruction of temple, it would be probably, one of the highest, most important, celebrated points in our history. So what is also essential is in the 1st century CE, Common Era, we have historians. The most important is Josephus, who is alive during the war with Rome. Philo, who is also a theologian and a philosopher who is alive earlier, and I believe lived in Egypt. So you have actual historians writing about the period, referencing what they know about history. So you have Josephus, who's talking about history, and he makes a lot of mistakes in his historical beliefs. But we can see that in the year 75 CE, that people probably looked at history in this way. And he writes about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots. He writes about the apocalyptic cult. He writes about the war. He was a Jewish officer in the north. He was captured, and then he decides to become a Roman and a historian, and then writes, of course, 2 great works. and a variety of other things. So it's during this entire period where things are changing. And another group of Jews are the, of course, proto-Christians. So this is another group that arises, that is, and again, you have to understand during this period, it's not like you're here and you're here and you don't mix. You got the Christians going to the synagogue with the Pharisees. The Pharisees, some of them sacrificing at the temple. Some of them go and live with the Essenes, then they come back. You've got farmers. So the borders of these groups are permeable, especially in these early periods. There's not a sense of fighting to determine the fate of Judaism between the early Christian sect as there is between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So you have all of these things going on during this period. And what you have is the Romans, who are generally pretty good about people having their religion, as long as their religion does not do anything to harm the Roman Empire. So if your religion is preaching against the Roman Empire, then they have a problem. If it's not, it's okay. I mean, they had laws that allowed the Jews to have their religion. It was in the books. And when Christianity later wanted to be applied to the Roman world under these laws, they were basically saying, we're Jewish too. We are Jews. We're the actual Jews. So because they wanted to be ascribed as people of Judaism so that they would be allowed to have their own religion within the Roman Empire. But this is later on. So this is what's going on now. We have Jesus, who is, of course, according to Christianity, the Messiah. He is not the Messiah yet, but he has become part of this world. And who is this character, and what happens with him obviously is essential to our understanding of the world today. So he is preaching during this same period. During this period that Christianity is becoming separated. What is this Christianity and how is it different? Now, remember, Jesus is Jewish, as we know. So he is preaching anti-corruption. That's one of the main thrusts of his belief system. The Sadducees running the temple cult are corrupt. The funny thing is, that is one of the few things that we all agree with, because all sides are basically saying the same thing. Within the Sadducees, those not in power are saying those in power are corrupt. The Pharisees say they're corrupt. The Essenes say they're corrupt. The proto-Christians say they're corrupt. So obviously, most likely, they're corrupt. They're living lavish lives, spending money on things they shouldn't spend on, marrying women they shouldn't marry, having affairs. Now, remember the priests are these are not Christian or Catholic priests. They're not supposed to be celibate, but they're having liaisons they shouldn't. They're using the money in ways they shouldn't, and so this is what Jesus is preaching against. After Jesus dies, obviously the resurrection becomes part of the world, this belief system in Christianity. And so this is where things will start to come to a head eventually. But any questions or thoughts first? So we're not at the destruction of the temple yet. But this is the world. It's not mass chaos. It's a very interesting world where Jewish viewpoints are stretched, and we have so many different ideas floating around under this Roman rule that is becoming a little bit more severe as time goes on.
Rabbi, when you say that these people were all Jews, define Judaism in that context.
These people were born Jewish and believed themselves to be Jewish. Conversion was not always allowed. Like, you could be a Jew to the extent that you wanted to be a Jew, no problem. converting to Judaism at this time period was sometimes difficult, although it could be done. Like Rome did not want Jews proselytizing. And so they didn't most of the time. So all of the people we're talking about are Jewish. The followers of Jesus are Jewish for the most part. Because why would you be upset at the attitudes of the Sadducees if you're not Jewish? If you're not Jewish, you don't care. It's not your temple. What does it matter to you? You only care about them being corrupt if it affects you, and that's the Jewish world. So most of the people following Jesus are Jewish. And of course, his belief is that these Sadducees are corrupt. He has some issues also with the Pharisees at times, but probably a lot of his followers were Pharisees because they also thought the Sadducees were corrupt, but probably most of his followers were not Pharisees. They were probably just regular folk in the countryside who saw this person telling what they thought was true. And so, yes, Larry.
I remember last year you had an interesting speaker from Israel, and he talked about Judaism sort of outside of the temple, with some of the synagogues, and if you want to call them a synagogue or whatever they were, houses of worship or meeting places that were there, which surprised some of us because we thought, all of it was concentrated there because that's in Jerusalem because of the priests. But apparently this was even another aspect of Judaism going on, apparently, which complicated it. That because he talked about, I forget where in Israel, he showed some archaeological slides and things.
Yeah, I mean, again, there is not one thing going on here. I'm only giving part of it. You have your own Jewish religion in your area. Remember, we don't have mass transit. So you're out in the countryside, your religion is what it's been for generations with your family. You're still Jewish. By this time, they're Jewish. It's not like millennia before when they were, striving in tension between having multiple gods and gods. Everybody believes in one God for the most part. They support the sacrifice of the temple for the most part, even if they're not participating in it. So, but they have their own traditions, their own beliefs all over the place. And so it's probably a very interesting, if it wasn't for the revolt and the destruction, it'd be a really wonderful place to live, I think. Well, obviously not compared to today because they didn't have sanitation or really access to Japanese food. So I wouldn't want to live there. Genevieve.
I guess I didn't really have a question, but I had a comment. I've been
Please.
watching this show on Amazon called The Chosen. And it really paints, I don't know if it's real, but it tries to be the most culturally accurate story of Jesus, where it makes Jesus a rabbi. And it's a very interesting show, but it definitely puts him in that mindset, like you're saying, like he's a real person and he was a rabbi and he was kind of like Martin Luther King or whatever, just trying to fight the corruption.
Yeah, and again, that's probably what he was. And we're going to talk about why and what happens later on to change this perspective. But let's look at that example of Hanukkah. I mean, Hanukkah is a holiday that some people didn't want. The Pharisees didn't like it because the descendants, Judah Maccabee's brother himself, and the descendants of the Maccabees became very corrupt. And so the Pharisees were not supportive of the holiday of Hanukkah, but other people were because, it had been around for 200 years and celebrated. And the Sadducees probably were. And people in the countryside, if their great-great-great-great-grandfather fought in that war, probably celebrated Hanukkah a bit. And so all of these different traditions. Now, things, though, do change. What changes is there ceased to be a power struggle in Judaism. The power struggle ends with the destruction of the temple in the year 70. So again, we go to war with Rome in 67. By 70, we've lost. Obviously, we know the story of Masada. That actually happens is 73. So 3 years later, they put down the last. So once the Romans defeat the Jews, they take Jerusalem away. Jews are not allowed to live in Jerusalem. They're still allowed to live in the area. They just can't be seen going into Jerusalem. Jerusalem, of course, is given a new name, and this is the place for for Christians to live. Actually, maybe the new name was given after the Bar Kokhba. Anyway, Jews not allowed in Jerusalem, and so now things are going to change. In the Jewish world, there's no more power struggle. Why? Because the power base, the Sadducees, their whole belief system was about sacrifice, and there's only one place you can sacrifice. That's the temple. That's been the belief system for centuries. There's no temple. There's no access to Jerusalem. So their power begins to fade. People probably said a lot like, well, the power of God was in the temple, supporting the Sadducees. The temple is destroyed. That means God doesn't support them anymore, you know? And so they are now passé, and it happens really pretty quickly considering the debates. Very quickly, they lose power. I mean, they're going to lose money, their prestige, the belief that God supports them. And so the Pharisees will now become the center of the Jewish world. They'll later be known as the rabbis. At this time, they're not. And so they will start their belief system in power. Resurrection at the end of time. We look at not just the Torah, but the entire Bible and all these extra writings. We'll be very, we follow all of these rules fairly carefully. When it comes to kashrut, you have biblical rules about keeping kosher, but as we know, we've added a whole bunch more based upon those rules, and that's what they do. So you have the Pharisees will become the center of the Jewish world. They'll be in charge. In the Christian world, that is still part of Judaism. There's still this Christian Jewish sect during this period that are probably supporting the Pharisees and are going to temples, and they're not really at odds with each other yet. But that is going to, of course, happen, and it all has to do, obviously, with what happens next. So there is a very important person in Christianity, of course, who we know, and probably the most important person after Jesus, and that, of course, is Paul. So Paul, the Apostle Paul, is a Jewish guy, has a vision, and this happens years after Jesus has died. This happens right before the destruction of the temple, and he and later people in his viewpoint start to notice different things, and that is that some of their followers are not Jewish. And the Jewish people are noticing some of the same things. So if you read the Gospels, the 4 Gospels in the New Testament are written after the year 70, after Paul. Why is this essential? Because now there is starting to become a rift between the Christian Jews and the Jews, where there wasn't one years earlier. There wasn't one during the time of Jesus. So if they had been written after Jesus died, they would probably be very different. But as you get farther and farther, the rift becomes more and more, and it becomes a competition. And so in the 4 Gospels, the Pharisees, who are often defined as Jews, are blamed for a lot of things, killing Jesus, being horrible people. And as you get to the last one, which I think is written around 100, it is very anti-Jewish. And this is because of when it's written. And this is because there is a competition that ensues. What is the competition? eventually it's going to be the competition for these Gentiles, because there's more of them. And whereas Paul may have some difficulty finding followers and his disciples finding followers in the Jewish world, there's ample people in the Roman world who are not very supportive of this multi-God system they've got going. And so they will start to concentrate on these people, on the non-Jews. Start teaching them about piety. Start teaching them about the importance of the Bible, the importance of Christ, the resurrection. And they will be very much centered on the Bible, using the Bible as a way to prove Jesus was the Messiah, using apocalyptic visions, using Isaiah, Ezekiel, especially Isaiah, to say that Christ had come, the Messiah had come, which of course is a very divergent view from Judaism, because Judaism also has resurrection, but Judaism does not have the resurrection of an individual. It has the resurrection of everybody. And when will the Messiah come in Judaism? When peace is on earth. I mean, the whole idea of a Messiah character is because of the issues people have with the governments they're under. If you're under an oppressive government, the more oppressive a government is, the more the messianic viewpoint becomes part of your world. So in the Jewish world, the Messiah comes at the end of days. The Messiah is just a descendant of David. He's not a superhuman. He's nothing beyond that. Whereas Christianity is starting to say Jesus was the Messiah, which can't be the case in Judaism because there wasn't peace on earth. And most importantly, because Jews are also now realizing that, these laws about conversions are getting a little lax as the Roman Empire realizes the flimsy nature of their religion. And so Jews also want to have these Gentiles to now convert. The Pharisees were very open to this. What happened? Well, which religion is easier to convert to? And Paul and his disciples had a great idea. They said, if you convert to our religion, you have to be a good person, believe in Jesus. That's it. We'll throw some water on you. You don't have to go through a major ritual to convert. Just join us. Whereas in Judaism, what do you have to do to become Jewish? You've got to have a restrictive diet. You can't travel on the Sabbath. You have to marry people within the religion. And most importantly, what happens if you're a guy?
Circumcision.
Right. Jeff. Sorry, I think that's, sorry, somebody's hands up.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Larry, there you go.
Yeah, I remember reading and talking to some Catholic priests about the importance of the fact that they abandoned at this time the idea of circumcision in order to convert to Judaism, and that was a big selling point. I think, the fact that, well, you can live an everlasting life and you can convert into this kind of a religion, you don't have to be circumcised, and that became a major point because some of the earlier, I forget which one it was, Mark or Matthew, they talk about what they call the Jesse tree, which is the line of David. David's father, I think, was Jesse, and that the fact that they try and link those 10 generations and 10 generations, and they try and show the legitimacy of Jesus in this Jesse tree. And as a matter of fact, I remember looking at certain cathedrals in France, and they had these stained glass windows which depicted the Jesse tree, which showed, that Jesus was legitimate, that he came through this Jesse tree, through David, he came through Bethlehem, and so forth. that he had all of the right credentials for being it. And apparently that didn't work. And then when Paul started in, I think Paul said, let me go one step further. You don't have to get circumcised. And that became even to the Catholic priests, they said, yeah, that became a real big selling point. That and the legitimacy of the life hereafter. You know, to live forever, you don't have to be circumcised, and just join us, like you say, sprinkle some holy water, and you can be, you know, here forever. Very appealing.
Yeah, and that again,
Good selling.
circumcision was certainly the number one reason we lost out. I mean, the whole idea of the next world is great, and you know, a good person's great, but lots of pain probably trumps that. So that is probably the number one. And obviously, you know, you don't have to get kosher was important as well, but no circumcision was the most important one. Now, at this point, at times the Romans are going to start to come in a little harder on the Christians for a couple reasons. One, they're trying to convert much more than others, more than the Jews, and they are talking about this man as the king or the Messiah who's going to save them in the next world, which has some issues. And so the Christians who are now saying that they are Jews, that they are the true Jews. And so they go through, we're Veris Israel, which is the famous saying, we are the real Jews. And so they try and prove it. And because of this need to show that they're the real Jews, because they want to be accepted in the Roman Empire, it adds another layer to the conflict between Jews and Christians, because they want to be safe in this Roman world, and to be safe, they need to be labeled as Jews, because there are laws that give privileges to Jews in this area. Actually, the laws, I think, were everywhere. So Jews did live all over the Roman world. And so this is what they try to do. We're the actual Jews, and they go back to the Bible and show Isaiah that proves that it's Jesus is, and they have the Gospels, and this is where it's all coming together. And they're not able to do it. I mean, the Romans will have issues with Christianity early on. Obviously, we'll talk about how that changes later, but there will be. And what they also do is they try and mimic the Roman world to really help bring about this connection to Rome. And that is, they create a leadership system that Judaism just doesn't have. We certainly have the priests that are in charge of the religion, but it's a much more loosely based thing. And the Pharisees have no such thing. They may have a Sanhedrin, but it's not a, you know, top-down set order. So this is where they create the bishops, mimicking in many ways the Roman way that the Roman world works. And so this is what we see happening during this entire period. So it's going to go on like this for a while, and we're going to see writings, but then of course things are going to become even worse for the Jews, because there is going to be another revolt. And this is during the reign of Hadrian, Bar Kokhba revolt, 130s, 135, 137-ish, 132, depending on. And Bar Kokhba is going to lead a major revolt against Rome, much bigger than the one that had happened in the year 67. He's going to be backed by Rabbi Akiba. They're going to have a lot more success because it's a guerrilla war. So they're not in one place for the Rome to just come and destroy. And Hadrian and Rome are not very happy about this Jewish rebellion. And so they come in afterwards and they just burn the country, kill as many Jews as they can. And so Christians now are separating themselves from this rebellion. They don't want to be seen as people who are rebelling. They are a distinct religion now that is different. And they obviously can take advantage of it by saying, listen, it wasn't us that rebelled, it was those guys. And remember, they're not all Jews, and even those who are descended from the Jews, it's been 70, 50, 60, 70 years. How many of us are best buddies with our fourth cousins, our fifth cousins, even our third cousins? Not many of us. And so the relationships that that existed before have all but dissipated. The competition has ensued. Now Jews are not given the same privileges they had had before because of this rebellion, and there's a way to take advantage of that. And so Christianity leaves this idea of being the true Jews and really becomes their own religion, separated for many reasons, and then sets about creating their own scriptures and continuing to create their own system. And what they can do at this time, because of what happened with the Bar Kokhba revolution, what happened with the Second Temple, they can say that God has disowned this group of Jews that said they were, and given God's support to us. We were not part of the temple system. We were not part of the Bar Kokhba revolution. We are the true inheritors of this ancient God connection. And that's where the division really is cemented. That these Jews are the heretics. We're the real descendants of Moses. We're the real descendants of Isaiah. And now with this idea that you can join us without all of these restrictions, you don't have to look different, you can look like everybody else, come and join us. And it's a really defining moment in Christianity where they can separate themselves and basically say we're the religion, and so come and join us. And so by this time a lot of the Bible, their Bible has been finished. It's going to be codified much later, but they're no longer Jews. They're now a distinct religion on their own. And in many respects, they are very anti-Jewish because that is the competition. And now they are winning the competition, whereas before they were not. Any thoughts or questions? Larry.
Just to go a little bit more in history now. Originally, we had the 12 tribes. Most of them in the north were decimated by the invasion, the Syrian or Persian invasion, whatever it was in the north.
Syrian,
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we have the two tribes then, who were the predominant tribes that are the ancestors, David and so forth. But then we kind of evolved into what I call three tribes almost, like we call ourselves, I remember we were Israelites, and you got called up to the Torah last. And then you had the Levites, who were kind of like the secondary, but at the highest echelon were always the Kohanim, right? The priesthood. So when did that kind of evolve? It seems like, first of all, we kind of like, the tribal system disappeared, but it really never disappeared. Or at least the ancestors of Aaron, I guess, are the Kohen, right?
Yeah, I mean, the tribal system did completely disappear. So what happened was eventually there were two Jewish countries, the north and the south. Basically 10 tribes of the north and 2 in the south. The northern country was destroyed and those tribes disappeared. That's the 10 lost tribes. What happened was some of them were probably taken into the Assyrian Empire and just, assimilated. And others filtered down into the other Jewish kingdom, which was called Judah. And when they all came down there, they all just mixed together and there's no more tribal Judaism. Because all these tribes came down, they mixed with the tribe of Judah, maybe a little Benjamin left over, and they just became Jews based on the tribe of Judah.
How did they decide then who was the priesthood then of these, all this mixture of people now that have, and
well, you have to,
the Israelites?
Right. Well, what you have to remember is there's actually 13 tribes.
Oh, yeah,
So,
Benjamin.
Yeah. No, well, there's 12 sons of Jacob, but Joseph doesn't get a tribe. His 2 sons get tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. So there's 13 tribes. 12 of the tribes get land and get their areas. So Dan is here, and Ephraim is here, Manasseh is here, Reuben's here, Judah's here, Benjamin's here. The tribe of Levi or the Levites, the tribe of Levi, does not get land. They are spread out all over the place. So even when the north is destroyed, there were still Levites in Judah. And some of the in Levites, some of the Levites are Cohens. The Cohens are part of the Levite tribe. So basically, think of, we're all a tribe. We're the Levites. We're the tribe of Levi. Larry and Jeff are first cousins, and you are descended from Aaron. So you are part of the Kohanim. You are the rest of us are just regular, low-level priests. But you guys are Cohens. You are from the head family. However, Larry, you are the high priest. Why? Because you're more influential, or your family has more money, or because your father, whatever. You're the high priest. Jeff is still a Cohen. You may not like Jeff. And so Jeff does not have a job. And he's destitute, even though he's a Cohen. Why? Because he's not a Cohen in part of the power structure. But he's still a Cohen. But we're all still the tribe of Levi. I'm a Levite, Genevieve's a Levite, Michael's a Levite, Paul, Eva, Alan, everybody's a Levite. We're just not the Cohens. The Cohens are a small sect within the Levites. So what happens is the Levites and Cohens are still there in the south. They're still in Judah. The ones that were in power in the south are still there. So there's always going to be Levites and Cohens. It's the other tribes that disappear. And so they're really, unless you're a Levite today, you can't prove you're from a tribe. You'll never be able to prove. Even Levites and Cohens, who knows if they're really Levites and Cohens going back to 722 when the north was destroyed. So there are three, we call it for Passover, 3 sections of Jews. During the period we're talking about, during the period of the 1st century, the Cohens were in power, or at least one section of the Cohens were in power in the temple. And so they were in power, and they had Levites who they worked for them. But so maybe Jeff's descendants overtook your descendants, Larry, and now your descendants, Larry, have no jobs because Jeff's descendants have taken over. That's how it works. It's not whether you're a Cohen, it's whether you're a Cohen in power. When the temple is destroyed, there is no more power base for the Cohens. They lose their power, but they're still Cohens. So the rabbis say, you know what, we're going to throw you a bone. You get a special prayer, you can do a few things, but good for you. But just because you're a Cohen doesn't mean you're not a rabbi. Cohen is only blood. Rabbi is not blood at all. Rabbi is skill, intelligence. Rabbi is connection. So there were rabbis who were Cohens. There were rabbis who were Levites, and there were rabbis who were Israelites, because it's all about blood. So the blood doesn't matter anymore. The blood stopped mattering in Judaism in the year 70.
Oh, okay.
And what we'll see is, we'll look at next time is the formation of Christianity and what happens to the Jewish community, because the Bar Kokhba revolution in 132, 135, 137 is really the beginning of the end of Jews in Israel as a meaningful center of the Jewish world. It'll take another 100 years, 150 years before, but it's the beginning of the end. So next week, do we have class next week? Yeah, we do have class. Next week is the day after. Maybe I'll cancel. Next week is the day after Rosh Hashanah, right? And the next week is the day after Rosh Hashanah. And then the week after that is Yom Kippur. So I may postpone class until the 12th, if that's okay with everybody.
Rabbi, I just wanted to mention, the reason I was late is I dropped my wife off, and she's now touring Mikveh Israel with the Temple Oseh Shalom women.
Oh, great. I'll go down and say hi.
That. So they're probably right down there now getting a tour.
I'll go down and say hi.
Yeah.
Michael, did you have a question? Is your hand up?
Yeah, I just wondered, do you have a title of a short, history of this period?
There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of them.
I'm
Probably
sure.
one of the best one is, I don't know if it's short, but it comes is a book called Veris Israel by Marcel Simon. That's the best book I've read on it. And so Veris Israel, of course, is the saying from the Christian world that, so that really talks a lot about the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. You mean like a small book? I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, this is
Notes.
obviously this is, this is a lot of detailed
Yeah.
history. I'm not sure.
I can send you,
Yeah.
actually, I can look at the ones I've read before. I don't remember all the names. It's been a while for some of them. And I can send that out to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rabbi, do you remember a book called The Passover Plot
No.
years
Yeah.
ago? That was really popular, I think, years ago, and it kind of like was a mystery story, and it would be worth revisiting again, just from a historical point of view. And apparently, they were trying to show that the whole thing that Jesus did was premeditated, that he knew all of the sayings from Isaiah, and he knew all of the prophecies and so forth, and that he had, all of these things planned. It's a very interesting book. It really was a bestseller, I guess, years and years ago. And I was just wondering if, today it's looked upon with any authenticity at all. I'm sure it's not by, majority of the Christian world or the Christian world, but it just was very interesting reading, one of these conspiracy kind of plot kind of things. The Passover plot.
Okay, I'll have to look it up. I don't know. I've never heard of it. I'm trying to look up some good books that I've read from this that are easy reads. I don't remember which ones I've read. Veris Israel is the one I remember most distinctly.
Easy reads are good.
Yeah.
Did the Jewish people ever really subscribe to the fact that any Messiah had come, or that there were any times at which we did believe there was a messianic figure, more than a vision of an image, of the future, a period of time, like we sometimes believe it is, rather a real person?
Yeah, it's happened many times through the years. Shabtai Zvi is the most famous one from the 17th century. But it's, messianic characters have been a part of Judaism for a long time. Most of them don't get giant followings. Some get big followings. But they all petered out. Shabtai Zvi is the most famous and probably got the most, but it usually happens, the Messiah, or belief in the Messiah, rises proportionally or in reverse proportion to the type of government. So the more open the government, the more supportive, the lessening of the belief in the Messiah. The more oppressive the government, the more difficult time you live in, the rise in the belief in Messiah. That's pretty much how it goes. And so Shabtai Zvi comes right after the Chmielnicki atrocities, one of the worst times in Jewish history. So obviously that's why he became such a inmate. But there's been Messiah characters really ever since the first century CE.
Just a commentary on that. I remember driving from the airport to Tel Aviv, and about halfway there, there's this huge billboard with a picture of Schneerson, and right above it, in huge letters, Mashiach.
Yeah.
And
it's very interesting that, that's a strange case that the belief that Schneerson is the Messiah has happened in an age where we have a lot of freedom. It's a unique situation in many respects. And I think it came about because of the too much freedom we have and how easy it is to assimilate. Genevieve, sorry, you had a question.
This might be the guy you were talking about, but wasn't there a Messiah that ended up being like bad or something that's pretty famous? I was learning about that everyone thought he was the Messiah.
It's probably Shabtai Zvi. He didn't really end up being bad, but he did convert to Islam. He was given the choice between death and Islam, and he chose Islam. So that kind of, stopped. I mean, there were still people who supported and believed in him after that, but it really started to to die down after he did that.
What
But
are
there's-
your feelings on Messiah or Messianic age? I mean, you look
Oh.
around the world, and I mean, things are in just such turmoil, and you kind of wonder, how did we get into this kind of a world situation here? And I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but just personally, it's
Yeah, and this again,
hard to be optimistic.
yeah, it is, but that's what the idea is that the Messiah, Reform movement's not big on the Messiah, but we are big on kind of an age of the Messiah. But we really, again, in a world like ours, where despite all the terrible things going on, we still feel like we have power, we have a say. We are living in a democracy, so we feel like we can change the world. So from the Reform perspective, the idea is if the Messiah, the Messianic age is going to come when we do it. Like it's not going to be a gift from God. It's going to be something we work towards. So I believe, it may take centuries or decades or millennium, but at some point, hopefully humanity will come together. And we're kind of like supposed to help be guides to that, which is a lot of responsibility. I'm going to put that responsibility on Jeff's shoulders.
Sure.
Save the world, please.
What I've been saying is that all the craziness in the world, I would like people just to act as if Jesus were looking over their shoulder. I would settle for that.
Yeah. And quite frankly, the craziness in the world is not as crazy as we think, because, it's a lot of it you see in the news. And the news, will go to, I remember a good example is when the church burned a Quran a few years ago.
Yeah.
The whole country was in uproar, and it was like the biggest news ever. And that church had like 5 members.
Yeah. Well, the Putin thing is particularly disturbing.
Well,
the thing
Putin is a different level than
yesterday
this.
about the nuclear. I mean, that raises it to a whole. And of course, the United Nations is meeting today, and I'm curious to hear what.
Well, I
they
mean,
have to
there are
say.
serious
That's-
issues
This
like
is
that
really,
to deal with. Yeah, that's a serious issue. So
yeah.
certainly that should make the news. But if you go to the news and I go to CNN, which I could go to right now, I go to CNN, and obviously Putin will be the top story, but then it'll be terrible things after this. If you go News and Buzz, you may have a
Hurricane.
lot to lose from not quitting.
A hurricane in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. So little leaguer injured, what all these terrible U.S. dollar, a little bit about Russia. That we've lost faith in the Fed, following the gasoline prices, inflation. So airports are too crowded. So that's just what we read about. So it's just the way we like to look at the news. We only want to look at the bad stuff. So, but look at our lives. I mean, how often are you dealing with truly horrible people in your lives? I mean, never, rarely. I deal with people who have different viewpoints, but how often am I dealing with really terrible people? Very rarely.
Well, you know what? It depends on how you view terrible, because, well, anyway, we could talk for hours about this, but to me, values are very important.
Yeah.
And people with really abhorrent values, I tend to view as terrible people, and we can discuss that.
This is the president of the Sun City Democrats talking.
Yeah. I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about, there are people with terrible values out there. I know that. We all know that. But how often, in comparison, do we actually see them? I mean, I work with people all the time. I'm around people all the time. And most of them are pretty good people. By far the vast majority are good people. So you just, you read on the news all these horrible things. It's out there, but we only focus on that as well.
Yeah, but like the saying goes, all it takes is a lot of good people who see something bad and do nothing about it. And,
Exactly.
What was Kennedy's famous statement that the lowest level of purgatory or hell is reserved for those who, in time of need do nothing, about it.
That's right. So we got to do something.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that even in, go out and register. I mean, you're not telling us how to vote, but at least register for voting,
yeah.
things like that, and exert your influence and things, so you have some control or direction.
Yeah,
of it.
that's right. I say go out and vote many times for the same election.
Yeah. Any preview of what your Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur speeches are going to be on, or you haven't?
If I ever write them, yeah, I think, well, yeah, I've got the themes. I've got 2 probably written, 1 almost done, and 1 started, and 1 the idea is there. So it's yeah, we'll see how they turn out. I'm usually a little bit farther ahead, but so many things have come up.
The new
So
documentary on Ken Burns is absolutely sensational.
that's what I hear.
People have seen it. It's
The important thing is if you're not coming to services live but watching on YouTube, just write a lot of good comments about me because I want to keep my job. But are you guys going to be able to come to services? Hopefully you will be. If not, then obviously everything's going to be on. We'll have everything on YouTube.
I think we'll only be second day Rosh Hashanah, but the others we'll try and watch on YouTube.
Okay, that's traditionally my worst sermon, by the way, just in case you're.
Oh.
And it will be again.
All right, go say hello to the Oseh Shalom group.
I am going to do that right now.
Okay.
Stay safe. So I'll send them know we're going to cancel the next 2 weeks. Give me a break the next day after Rosh Hashanah next week to get ready for Yom Kippur, and then obviously the one after that's on Yom Kippur, and then we'll continue afterwards.
Okay.
And we'll go through the late 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries for the Jewish and Roman and the Christian world. Guys, you're awesome. Chag Sameach, Shana Tova, Happy New Year. Hopefully we'll see all of you here. If not, please join us on YouTube. We will be doing an outdoor events if people feel more comfortable doing that as well. So just to let you know.
When is that?
That is on Rosh Hashanah. We have the outdoor shofar blowing, and we have Tashlich.
Ah,
And I know you guys have one out there as well for those in Sun City. So look into that if that's a little bit easier for you. So fantastic. But yeah, and also we're only doing 40% capacity. So if you want to come to services and sit in the corner by yourself without anybody near you, you will have that option. So, all right, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
You guys stay safe. As always, you're awesome. Stay awesome, everybody.